you so much for being here tonight. I'm so excited to be talking to Erika Lewis, who is the author of Kelcie Murphy and the Hunt of Danu. Hi, Erika. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
It's great to be here.
So for those that aren't familiar with you, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Okay, what about myself? I'm originally from the East Coast. I live in Los Angeles now, but I grew up in Virginia. I spent a lot of time in Massachusetts as a kid in the summers, and moved out here to work in the TV business, which I love, and did that for about 15 years, and then moved over into writing books. And I guess this book that just came out right here, I'm going to grab it, is my 5th book that's been published. So in my most favorite wonderful middle grade series that I love so much. And yeah, I guess that's everything about me. I have a dog who's a golden retriever named Bailey, who's going to whine outside the door. And I have a messy office, and that's pretty much it.
I too have a messy office. What you can't see is that it looks like a bomb went off.
The screens are good. You can angle them any direction you need to, right?
Exactly. As long as the bookshelf looks good, we're fine.
Exactly. Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit more about the transition between working in like TV production to now writing books?
Yeah, the biggest difference is the solitary nature of it. Sometimes I do go a little stir crazy, and fortunately, I have a really good support group of other authors and screenwriters, and we hang out at coffee shops when we're all a little like, we need human interaction. But it was, for me, I was what they called a development executive and then a current executive. So my job was to work for the studios and the networks, and manage everything creative for the series, staffing, whether it was directors, writers, actors, and budgets and all of that kind of stuff. And then also the continuity of the shows. So it was great because it worked kind of both sides of your brain a little bit. And I had a lot of fun with it, working mostly on scripted shows and some alternative, they call it now, reality shows. And then I wrote a graphic novel, which was the first thing I'd written. And I'm a huge nerd, not closeted in any way. I go to Comic-Con every year. It's my favorite thing in the world. And so I wrote this graphic novel called The 49th Key. And it was sort of the first thing that I ever wrote that got picked up. And I was like, okay, maybe I can do this. And then I went back to school because I was not an English major. And although I had read a ton of books and written scripts before, I really wanted to really be forced into the prose mode and really getting deep in the weeds on the craft. And so I went back to school and wrote a novel during the program called Game of Shadows. And that was my first novel that got picked up. And then after that, I was like, okay, I think I can do this. And thankfully, I have a very supportive partner in my life, my husband, and I have wonderful kids who are extremely supportive, because I kind of disappeared at that point into my stories, which is hard. But yeah, so that's the big difference, is that you're very solitary in what you're doing. And then, like TV, it's the freelance world. So you just sort of don't know exactly what's going to come next, always.
Absolutely. Do you think you would ever want to merge the two and maybe turn one of your books into like a show or a movie?
Yeah, for sure. I actually have written pilot scripts before that have been optioned. For me, I would love to see any of, who wouldn't want to see their properties as film or TV or streaming or whatever we want to call it these days, because it all seems to be changing so fast. And I'd like to be a part of it. The one thing I've learned in the business, though, is that you have to be very collaborative in order for the process to work. Otherwise, it becomes very angst-ridden, and it's not fun. I mean, there's big dollars on the lines. There's big things being put in behind the scenes. And so for me, I enjoy that collaboration. Sometimes I think people will see something in what I wrote that I may not see, right? That they want to expand on or make bigger. And that's kind of why the collaboration works. Part of it is important. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think too, as an author, you probably have like a very clear idea in your head of what the characters look like. But I know that like your readers probably have a very different opinion too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, and I don't think, it's kind of funny. Like there was a YA novel I wrote called The Color of Dragons. I wrote it with R.A. Salvatore. We co-authored it. It was an amazing experience. And one of the things that came up in the book was that we actually don't have very clear descriptions of what the main characters look like. There's a little bit of hair color and a little bit of physical, but everyone I would talk to who read the book had a very different impression of what Maggie looked like or what Griffin looked like. And that was on purpose because it was a sort of Arthurian story, King Arthur, pre-Arthurian. But we wanted people to sort of all cultures to be able to see themselves in whatever the story was. It wasn't it wasn't something where we were definitive and it had to be a certain way. I have a very clear image in my mind of what Maggie looked like, but I didn't put it all down on the page. And Bob and I sort of did that on purpose. It was just something we wanted to try out, and it actually seemed to work really well. It's kind of interesting. On the flip side of things, in Kelcie Murphy's story in the middle grade, there are certain things that are really important character traits, like if you're Fomorian born, you have two different color eyes. So there are certain things that, and each eye color meant something different with their powers. And so there's like, there's things that, you have to build in there. But at the same time, I don't, I think, for me, you cast who's great in the part and
Exactly. It's who's the best fit.
yeah, it doesn't matter to me. No.
Well, in the way I see it too, like I'm notorious for inserting myself as the main character of every book I read. So character descriptions don't really matter.
Don't we all, right?
I'm the main character.
It is, there's certain things that are, Kelcie, for example, in the first book, her red hairs are really important. It's something that comes up with her being teased about certain things. But truthfully, even if that wasn't there's nothing that's that important to the story. The characters themselves and their development arcs, and that's kind of stuff I would probably hold on to a little bit more. That would be important for me. I wouldn't want a character who we all expected to be a certain way because we've read the books to be so different in the actual production of it at all. But physical stuff doesn't matter.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of shifting a little bit.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the J3 Foundation and how you got connected with them?
Ah, the J3 Foundation is an incredible organization that's here. It's mostly, she goes barking, mostly here based in Los Angeles. I think they're branching out a bit now, but what they do is go into mostly elementary schools, fourth grade, some fifth grades, but mostly fourth grade. They catch kids who aren't as advanced readers. And for me personally, this is, I had a hard time learning to read, and nobody really realized it. Nobody knew. And I have a form of dyslexia where I literally like, I can write a sentence and sometimes I really have written it backwards. And my editor's like, what does it say? I'm like, oh God, right. I don't even know. I have to figure that out. Nobody caught it. And so for me, learning to read was really hard. And what I figured out was that over the course of through middle school into high school, it wasn't until I was in my English class in high school where my teacher was like, the only way to get better at reading and comprehending is to read more. And it was a force yourself kind of a thing, which I didn't know and nobody ever told me. So what the J3 Foundation does is that they catch these kids at risk right in the fourth grade when all of the kids are sort of branching out into their reader, whether they're going to be good readers or not as good readers. And they make everyone a good reader, and they put them into an after school program that they fund. And they progressively work through the course of the year to catch them up to the other kids. And so I was introduced to it. I'm trying to remember the first time. I'm trying to remember. I think I had heard about it from a friend of mine's who they came into their school and they were a part of the program. And then I just called and I was like, what can I do? Can I volunteer, come in, be a cheerleader, do some story workshops? I love to do school visits. I do them all the time and, teaching kids how to write stories and do their own kind of thing. And so for them, it was sort of like the end of the year of that after they've actually like done all this great work. It's like, hey, she's going to come in and talk to you about, yeah. So that's how I've gotten involved, and then fundraising and all of that kind of stuff. So if you can give some money to J3 because they're just doing amazing things. So
amazing. I will find the link for them so that we can post it in the nest as well.
okay.
But Sharon, the book dragon, says that she wishes that they had J3 around her area because her partner is dyslexic and there were no teachers to work with them.
Yeah, and you can get in touch with J3. They can also I know they're branching out to other areas because of the post-pandemic. When a lot of the kids got back to school, there was a tremendous slip off, right, of reading, and they had a lot of classrooms. But I do know that they're expanding. They've told me they're expanding to other states too, not just California. So definitely get in touch with them. They're great. You never know.
Absolutely. And honestly, the more awareness and the more donations, I think will help them branch out. So
the more they can expand.
Yeah, we will absolutely post the link in the nest. Now let's get into some book-specific questions. Before we get into anything too heavy, did you do anything fun to celebrate the release?
I had the most wonderful experience. I was actually in the UK, ironically, on July 25th when book 2 came out, and I knew the book had released there as well, but I wasn't sure. I hadn't really been in touch with a publicist on what I was going to do that specific day to celebrate, and we had taken a train down to London. And I went into Forbidden Planet and I just sort of surprised them. And I was like, hey, are my books on the shelf today by any chance? And they were. And it was so great. So it was like, okay, great. So we had a little celebration at Forbidden Planet. And that's like a bucket list place for me to have. I mean, it is a mega warehouse of every collectible you can imagine. And then the bottom floor is just bookshelves after bookshelves and fantasy and everything you can imagine. I love that store so much. I was just like over the moon. So it was fun because my husband and my son were with me and they're like, yay. So we had a little celebration there. And then when I came back, I had something here, and I've honestly just been trying to catch up on all the people who've wanted signed copies. So that's sort of what I've been doing since I'm back.
Speaking of, do you know where we could find some signed copies? Because I know that's a big question in our group.
Oh yeah. Signed copies of book 2 for Kelcie, Children's Book World and Village. Well, and in that's in Los Angeles. They actually have a whole page, and I can get you the link to it for you can have any of the books that I write signed. That's where I was today because I can just pop up there and sign them, and it makes it a whole lot easier. I know Village Well in Culver City also has some signed books. I sent there's a bunch with signed book plates at Books of Wonder in New York. So if you're in New York, you can get them there. And I think that's all so far. But yes, definitely hit up either Children's Book World or Village Well. I can always pop down there. I can personalize them. They're amazing. So
yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
I know there's quite a few people in our group that really like signed copies. So
yeah.
We will post links as well for that, everyone. So with Kelcie being the second in the series, can you kind of tell us how this book has continued the story? I'm trying to make sure that we're not doing too many spoilers.
Yeah. So in book one, it really focuses on Kelcie, and it focuses on our introduction to the other world and to the school for the Academy for the Unbreakable Arts, and what it is that is being taught there, how their powers come out. And it's really Kelsey's journey to discover who she is, who her parents are, and but from a character perspective, it's more about her learning to be a better friend and her learning about you know, through empathy and sympathy with the other characters in her SEAL Team 4, as a lot of the kids like to call it, her Fianna, but they call it the SEAL Team 4, that she's put into when she gets to the school. And each one of them has their own journey that they're sort of taking through the story. And a little bit, of course, with their budding relationship with Niall. But in book two, I wanted to crack open the other world. And so in book two, and I can show a little bit on the cover, there's two characters on the cover. And this is Lexus and Kelcie, and Lexus is actually from the lands of winter. So without giving too much away, the thing about book two is that it's a story about a war, a never-ending war. And I think that we all know that there's two sides to every perspective in a war. And it was really important for this story for us to get to know everyone in the lands of winter as much as we were learning about the lands of summer. So the story is told through their two perspectives that goes back and forth. I think the back cover kind of sets it up well. A winter spy, a summer soldier, and a world plunged into darkness. So that's kind of, there's a lot at stake in this book. And it was really important that these two groups from opposing schools, because in the lands of winter there's a school there as well called Braverwell, and how these kids are trying to really understand what it is that they're fighting for and why they're fighting each other. So
I think that is a pretty incredible message to have in a middle grade book. How do you tackle such a heavy topic for a younger group?
well, the one thing that I think a younger perspective has is a less jaded perspective. Now, these two sides are coming at it having been a part of this war for a long time. So a lot of them, you know, Niall lost his father, and um, all of the characters also in the lands of winter have their own things that they've been through. And at the start of the story, we're thrown into the middle of a battle that's being caused by the lands of summer and winter. And so in the story, they're coming at it though from a younger perspective, which is so much more willing, you know, in those early years to be open to that kind of change. And so the way I wanted to tackle it was the same way you would tackle any story in middle grade, where these two characters, even if they're bullying each other, whatever it is, they just don't know each other. They don't know who they, you know, what it is that's going on. And if they can just open their ears and their hearts a little bit and listen. Now, of course, it takes the whole book for that to happen, right? But there comes a point where it's staying in their age level of what they would expect. I equated a little bit to Avatar: The Last Airbender, the animated series, because that tone and the way that these people have to start working together is fairly similar in that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think too with middle grade, I've noticed like a pretty big shift from what I initially thought middle grade was, which was like this kind of really juvenile thing, to it's really just become like the adventure genre.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it. Here's the thing for me about middle grade is that in TV we used to say, when I was doing some kid shows too, that the kids like to watch kids that were 5 years older than they were. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But from a reader's perspective, with kids, you know, you have to make the kids feel true to their age, and not not dumb it down. You know what I mean? The kids know when they're being written down too. You know what I mean? Like, oh, good little kid. So for me personally, and I have kids, and I'm around them all the time. So they're not perfect. They make mistakes, and for me that was really important to put into the characters. And so there's the adventure of it all, but there's also making it true to the when you're talking about a 12-year-old, that's the sixth grade. It's not technically an element. Well, some places it's still elementary
Yeah.
school, but in a lot of places it's middle school. Like 12, 13, 14-year-old protagonists in middle grade stories are really going through middle school and the trauma that comes from middle school, which was a very hard time. And so the high action is in some ways a bit of a relief from the angst that can come from being in middle school, because there's a lot of things that kids go through at that age, that is iconically middle school. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think like everything feels very high stakes when you're that age.
It does. So it even amps up, you know what I mean? Once you dive into the action, which for me is so much fun. I love to write very scary. I mean, book 3 might be too scary. We'll see how it goes. It's a little bit scary. But with all of them, a little bit of that, and and also though keeping the hopeful ending is always for me really important. So
I like that.
yeah.
From the nest, Brooksy03051 asks if you have ever asked the kids that you do school visits with what they want to read in books.
Oh, sure. And a lot of times what they will tell me is what they want to read in my books. Like I had someone when I was in Virginia, I think it was in March, I was there for a bunch of school visits. One of the kids, it was a huge auditorium in a cafeteria or gymnasium. I can't remember now. One of the kids comes up to me and literally is telling me what needs to happen in the next book. And I was like, okay, shockingly, he was so close to what I'd actually written that I was like, I'm not telling you anything because no spoilers here. And then he was all about how it should end and where it should go. And I was like, okay. I'm right in the middle of writing that. You can't tell me anything. But it was really funny. They will tell you what they want to read, but they don't tell you in the way an adult would tell you. Like if you're walking through a bookstore, like we can pick out a genre name. We can say we want to read a contemporary, or we can say we want to read a romance or a fantasy. They will tell you they want to read a book about a dragon, or they want to read a book about a dog, or they might tell you they want to read a story about summer camp or whatever it is. But they don't typically talk about the kinds of things they want to read in terms of genres.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine they probably also compare a lot to like things that they see on TV.
I can't tell you how many times people brought up Dungeons and Dragons is hugely popular right now. Hugely popular. And I used to play it as a kid, but like it is massive resurgence. And so every time I went into a classroom and I throw up a bunch of monsters that are in either in my book or another book, so like, oh, I know what they knew what every single one of them was. And they're like, are there creatures like this from Dungeons and Dragons in your book? And so that was the big is that in there? That was everywhere. East Coast, West Coast, it didn't matter where I was. Middle of the country.
We can thank Stranger Things for that one, I think.
I guess so, right? And some of these kids were like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. I mean, I love Stranger Things. It might have scared me. Excuse me.
I can't watch it alone.
A little bit at that age. I don't know. Those freaky monsters, what are they called, with the mouths that open like
Demogorgons, yeah.
Demogorgons, yeah. Oh my God. And when it ate the cat, I'm sorry, spoiler alert. Oh my God. I was like, this is not good. This is not good. It's okay to eat people, but don't eat the pets, please.
You leave animals out of it.
Seriously.
So we're kind of talking a little bit about this before the chat, but there's a lot of like Celtic influence in the books.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the folklore and myths and things that you used from Celtic?
Oh, for sure. So this story is technically written in Irish mythology, which is a subset of Celtic mythology. You know, the Celts themselves spread out all the way across Europe, so start all the way over in Ireland and spread over. So when there's Welsh mythology and Scottish, their own iconic things, you know, Kelpies and that kind of stuff, those sort of spread across. And so with this particular story, there's a lot of, I lived in London for a bit, and while I was there, I spent a lot of time in Ireland. It's literally my favorite place on earth, and we go back as much as we can, and to Scotland and the UK, into England as well. But for me, I fell in love with all of these great stories about Danu, about the Dagda, about the Cuchulainn and their legends, all the Irish mythologies, the different cycles that they put their history into, and the mythological cycle. I was just, you know, totally fascinated. So that's their gods and goddesses time period, and it's pretty close. Maybe it predates a little bit the Egyptian time period. So like their Newgrange, which is a big giant cairn, if you've seen it. Solstice, it comes straight through, you know, it's like one of those, there's different chambers that light up, you know, and those mounds, those quote unquote fairy mounds, actually predate the pyramids. And so I was fascinated, and when I went to write the story, I originally really wanted to, um, it was very heavy in the mythology of it all, and I started to peel it back a little bit because I wanted to make it very accessible too, and I really didn't want. Please forgive my dog; she's going crazy.
Okay.
I don't know if you can hear. I really wanted to not have the gods and goddesses in the story in terms of like manipulating the story or the reason for the bad things happening. I wanted this to be about the other world and how I was going to build that with these two lands. So for me, I went to visit all the sites. I would go to all the local bookstores and get as many original, you know, Irish written texts about the different, you know, and some of my favorite ones were the kids ones because they were really digestible, and it would be like, here's this story, you know, Children of Lear. A lot of people know where the evil stepmother turns the daughters into swans, and you know, and so there's all of those stories. I wanted to see what I could infuse and then manipulate it a little bit. And so like in the first book, we have King Baelor's evil eye, which is the thing, which is a right out of Irish mythology. Everything down to the lids lifting up and all the crazy stuff happening. That was right out of there. There's a reason why Niall, I mean, I wanted to have a kid that was limb different, a kid that you know, he was only born with one hand. I hesitate calling him disabled because he, you know, like most people who are have a disability, they're just as good at everything as we are, you know. But with Niall, specifically him being born without a hand is right out of Irish mythology as well, because Nuada lost his hand in battle and he could no longer be king. And it wasn't until it regrew that he could be king again. And I kind of wanted to play with that, which you'll see that kind of fluctuates throughout the whole story. Anyway, so the prejudice against him for being born like that. So those kinds of things are all from, there's even like Fairdyde's stone circle at the school is named after Skyhawk's other favorite student. And so Cuchulainn, who's the biggest hero in Irish mythology, was best friends with Fairdyde at her original school, the Fortress of Shadows on the Isle of Skye, which, because it's right out of Irish mythology, I probably should have clarified that. She was an actual teacher, warrior, goddess who had her school on the Isle of Skye. And if you didn't leap over the bridge completely, it would throw you off. And she wouldn't teach you. You know, you had to pass her test in order for her to teach you. Well, these two students were best friends there and then ended up on the opposite side of a war. And Cullen had to kill him. And so I was like, well, she would dedicate a stone circle to this student. So there's like little Easter eggs in there if you really know Irish mythology well, all the way throughout the story. But I just became obsessed with it, you know, visiting the stone circles. There's the big Newgrange, but Stonehenge, but then, you know, there's a ton of them all over, whether you're in Scotland or Ireland or even in mainland Europe, there's a lot of stone circles. And they all have this sort of, it's just really cool connection when you walk through. It's just, I don't know, there's just something about it. So anyway.
No, that's amazing. I'm only a little bit jealous that you got to research that for work.
Yes, that's the best thing about being an author. I guess.
Ireland is on my bucket list.
Yeah.
My family originated in Kilkenny.
Oh yeah,
I'm descended from the Butlers of Ormond, if you're familiar.
I have been to Kilkenny for 4 or 5 days. That fortress is all still there. It's so cool.
Yeah, Kilkenny Castle my family used to own.
Oh, well, you have to go. I mean, it's
literally
the best. It's so much fun. The city is so cool, and it's built around the fortress. You know, it's all built.
Yeah.
It's all still there. The castle, everything, the walls. Yeah, it's probably one of their oldest. I think it might be their oldest fortress. You know, they never had any fortresses until the English came, and then they sort of mimicked them a little bit.
Yeah.
Building towers everywhere.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, now only because you mentioned the stones, I have to ask: are you an Outlander fan?
I am an Outlander fan. Much. Look, I love Outlander. There's it can be a tough watch sometimes. There's a part of me that's like, what's going to happen this season? Am I going to be able to handle it? Because I have read some of the books, not all of them. Mm-hmm. I have not read this book that this season was based on, so which was good because I had a lot of surprises, but so far so good. I am an Outlander fan. For sure.
I don't know if I've seen so many people like touching the stones, like
all the time. I'm gonna and the funny thing is we went. So this is such a great story. Speaking of Outlander, so my kids at the time, I think they were like 13 and 11. I don't remember one of the last trips. The first trip, I guess it was one of their first trips over. We started in Edinburgh, and I needed to get to the Isle of Skye in order to research some more for the school, for the Unbreakable Arts. And I was like, we got one of these tour bus things to go that was going up to Skye, but it went through the Highlands on the way. I was like, this is cool. We'll stop at all these castles. Lo and behold, I put down on the list, you could put down what you wanted to stop at. And it was just Heather, the woman who was driving us through this, the tour guide, was brilliant. She would tell you these incredible stories about the clans all the way through the Highlands. And every single solitary person on that bus was a huge Outlander fan. So everywhere we stopped, we went to Castle Leoch, we went to like every single site that was, but we didn't do a lot of stone circles. But it was funny. Every time they would come out, everywhere you went, there was Outlander stuff everywhere. It was hysterical. And when we got up to the Isle of Skye, and I said I needed to go to Dunskye Castle, the driver of the bus was Scottish, she didn't even know anything. She never heard of Skye Hut or the Fortress of Shadows, or she didn't know any of it. So she was like, I don't even know what this is. So she searched it the night and then came back the next morning. She's like, I didn't even know this was there, because the Isle of Skye was a part of Ireland back then. And, you know, it's Irish mythology. So it was really kind of funny. But everybody on the trip was like, does this have something to do with Outlander? And I was like, sure. Yeah, we'll see it in future seasons. We have to stop here. For me, we'll stop here. For me, it's not Outlander. But it was very funny. It was very funny.
Was there a favorite place that you went to when you were doing your research?
Well, I love the Isle of Skye. It was if you're at all like a hiker or a walker, there's the most incredible parks there. I loved Eileen Dunham Castle, which is in a lot of movies. You've seen it. It's got this big giant bridge that goes out to the castle itself. And I learned something really interesting there. There were these slits in the wall, and they were down about halfway up the wall, and they were about like this big, and they weren't really that noticeable, and they were covered with a vent almost. But in the stairwell behind it that wound around, it would funnel out and get a lot bigger. So it was like a megaphone. And it's where the term comes, the walls have ears. So people would spy on their guests, listening to the conversations before they would come down into the room, or if they were negotiating like with other clans, they would sit there and listen to what people were saying before they came down into the room. And that's where the
That's smart.
yeah, I thought that was kind of cool. So yeah, so that was probably one of my favorite places that we went to.
And then before we move on, are there any stories that are your favorite that you think we should look up individually?
You mean of my books?
So
Or
like Celtic mythology that
oh,
inspired you.
yeah. I mean, should I look to my bookshelf? There, I'm gonna grab. So this series, and I think they have all different writers, but it's like a guide to ancient gods and goddesses. This one's called the Celtic myths. They have one that's called the Norse myths. This is really it's very digestible for somebody like the ones that are really like get deep into the actual Irish language and like sort of it can get very confusing very fast. That one is really clear, and it's fascinating because for me, I love the stories of Cuchulainn, who's their biggest hero. He's all of his journeys. I love the story of the Quicken Fairy Palace, which is in that book, and that's like a story about how these soldiers get trapped with this magic inside this palace, like they can't move and they're going to starve to death and they have to figure out how to get out. There's great stories about the Children of Lear is a really famous one that I love. And Daughter of the Forest, which I don't know if you guys know that book, and forgive me, I'm blanking on the author's name. She's unbelievable, but that story has roots in Children of Lear about with her brothers being turned into swans, and it was that was a great story that very connected to that story. So yeah, I mean those would probably be the biggest ones. Yeah.
There's so many different stories in Celtic mythology. I've done a little bit of digging myself, and they're
Yeah.
all kind of like almost like Grimm's type stories, and I
They're,
live for that. So
they're dark. They're
they
dark.
are.
Yeah. Yeah. There's in the beginning of Kelcie book 2 and the Hunt for the Heart of Danu, there's a moment where she's introduced to the salmon of knowledge. I don't want to give away too much about the salmon of knowledge, but my favorite thing in the world is to play with these myths and sort of turn them into, what would happen to genetics many times over? Like, would they still be the salmon of like all knowing salmon, or would these fish be really stupid? You know what I mean? Like, I like to have fun with so, there's all these great stories about, how they, got to be these brilliant salmon with this potion that tipped over into the river. But then I like to take that and sort of, make it middle grade humor, Yeah. So that's fun.
I love it. So in the book, there's obviously magic. Can you tell us how you approached developing the magic system?
Yeah, I wanted to you tap into what was in the Irish lore somewhat. Like the catchy, the idea of shapeshifters are definitely something that they have, and then I would expand on it. I sort of wanted to tap into the idea of the druid lore, which probably technically even more Welsh, but hey, I was cherry picking. And having that their telekinesis or their telepathy or whatever it was that they were developing as as their, and I wanted it to be very different from, any kind of wand magic or, so I very specifically went through different things that are important. Horses have a big, um, piece in Irish mythology, Epona, the goddess. And so I wanted to make sure we had something that was connected to horses, and but not shape shifting, because we have catchies that are shape shifting, right? And ravens that are shape shifting. Which, I mean, for me, I had to have raven shapeshifters. That was just, because I knew that the three Morigna, the Morrigan, were going to play a big part in the story. Because rather than having prophecies, they typically would see omens and be the cause of omens, because they didn't necessarily predict the future. They might see the outcome of a battle or see some sort of peace, but it wasn't a prophecy. There was nothing they could do to change. You know what I mean? And it was, something is going to happen, but I don't know what causes it, and I don't know. You know what I mean? So for them, their their role in the story, also it being, I didn't want them leading anything. So, and I wanted to have those. So as I was developing things, I sort of connected it to who I knew was going to be in the story. But then at the same time, I wanted the kids to all to have their own unique gifts. And with the Fomorians were a real society, with the Furbolgs, who was actually there before the children of Danu arrived. So in Irish mythology, there were clans, so to speak, for lack of a better word, living in Ireland at the time in Erin. And these these in their minds supernaturals came in down, and if you go into cairns in there, they've actually got these, um carved into the ceiling. They've got these they look like ships, boats, the underneath of a boat with oars out, but they also have all these spiral galaxies all over the place. And so some people speculate that they believe they came down from, like aliens, or they were probably Viking. They were probably from a Norway or Sweden or somewhere in that area, but because they were fair skinned and light haired. They all thought they were blonde, but they believed they were supernatural, and they came down from the sky, and they came in, and they basically went to war with the other clans living there. And the Fomorians were very warring at the time, and King Baelor was their king at the time when they came down, and he was pretty awful. So they ended up in war with them. And so when I went into the other world, I wanted to bring the Fomorian clan, and because I really wanted to touch on this idea of an ostracized society, or something that happens in our world in the past and keeps reoccurring in the present, and hopefully we'll stop it in the future. But people being marginalized in a certain way, and the Fomorians had that happen to them, so I sort of just carried it into the storyline. And there's also all this uh, stuff about, in the maps of things, when the lands were more connected, that a lot of the people that were originally settled there had actually come from the Asia area, and Mongolia, and had come down into, and those were the people who eventually made their way all the way over to Ireland. And so I wanted to have some sort of connection, and that's why they're elementals, because I felt like, okay, they can have a power that's different. They are not related in any way to the children of Danu, who are the rest of the other world. They are their own thing. And so how do I make them really unique in that society, and not make them any kind of shifters like the others, or anything like that? And so that's how that became that in the world building. So
amazing.
yeah.
I would love to see how your brain works. Actually, and that leads into another really great question is,
Okay.
what's your writing process like?
It's changed over the years. Coming from TV, I used to be a master outliner. I never pranced my way through anything. I outlined, chapter outline, and halfway through the outline, if I wanted to go a different direction, I re-outlined. And what I found with book two, I wrote a whole first draft of book two, and then I threw the entire book out. And I know my editor was like, "What And I was like, well, I didn't throw it out completely. I originally didn't tell it from two perspectives. And I was like, this isn't going to get me where I need to go. And what I realized is that I had written this outline, and in theory, it worked fine, but in practice, it wasn't working. And so for the first time ever, I became sort of what I call a plotzer. I plotted where I was going. I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't beat out every single chapter before I went into it. And then when I went into book 3, I literally only wrote a 3-page summary. And Bess and I went back and forth, my editor, and she's like, go for it. And then I just started writing. And so the first draft took me a little bit longer, but the draft is I'm very happy with it. And so I was like, she's like, oh, okay, this is my I'm a plotzer. I have an idea of where I'm going. I don't start completely from a blank page. But I do sit down and only give myself that summary bit. And endings always change. I wasn't exactly sure if I was gonna kill off any characters, or there's a whole storyline in book 1 with Kelcie's dad that has to make its way into book 3, and so there's a lot of stuff that that needs to be. And I wasn't really sure when I started the book who was going to make it through, so that was helpful, to have that freedom, because I think for me it opened up a lot of process, but I didn't start out that way. So yeah.
Do you think it was harder to write book 1 versus book 3, like with how you were writing and plotting?
Yeah, I think from my I think for me, I think with every book, a writer gets better. I think Brandon Sanderson actually talks a lot about this. You're coming into your own voice. You're coming into the way that you when you write something in a passive sentence, you immediately go back and fix it. You don't wait until the 3rd or 4th draft to, like, you recognize something right up front where, okay, this is the way it's being said in my brain, but this isn't going to work on the page and I have to fix it. And the experience of that for me personally, because I'm sure some people are born brilliant writers, but I wasn't. I have to work at it, and so I have to work a lot. And so for me, as I've been learning and going through my process, with every book, I felt like I was getting a little bit more confident in that. And so with book 1, I wasn't as quick to recognize if I write a chapter. Like with book 3, I wrote a chapter, and then like 2 days later, I would go back into that chapter again. Most people will be like, vomit draft your first draft, get it all out on the page. And I highly recommend that on your first book. But for me, in this particular process, I knew when there wasn't enough action, or I knew when the right emotional note wasn't being hit. I could sense it, and moving on was going to kill me. So I would go back, and I almost re-edited every chapter right after I wrote it. And it, it took 6 months as opposed to 4 or 5 for a first draft, but I was much happier with the process. So yeah, I think for me, it's more of a learning curve,
Yeah.
So
okay, I'm gonna say that this is gonna be my second last question, but I think this really ties in well. Is what advice do you have for aspiring authors?
Okay, so to read. I mean, the thing that's most important is, she's barking again. Sorry. Most
opinions
in the world is to read a lot of different voices. One of the things that happens when we're first starting to write is that we mimic. We fall into someone we love, and we're like, oh, I love the way they write this way. Or, like in Outlander, Diana Gabaldon will talk about how she starts with the pen on the desk, and then she describes it, and then she backs out and describes the desk, and then she describes. And I don't have the patience for that. But a lot of people like to read a lot of descriptions about, and that's one way of writing. But as you as you will eventually develop your own voice. So the first thing I would do is read a lot, figure out what genre you want to write in, whether you want to write romance novels, whether you want to write fantasy, adult, middle grade. Um, don't hold yourself to rules. One of the things that somebody said to me when I first started writing middle grade was, you can't write middle grade in first person. And I was like, have you read Percy Jackson? Percy Jackson's in first. I was like, why not? So there was always these rules that people kept giving me every time I would turn around. And I threw all those out. And when you read Kelcie, you'll see like I didn't abide by any rules, there's a little romance in there. There's a little, there's stuff in there that I wanted to do. And I felt like it was age appropriate and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like you have to throw the rules out and don't let anyone tell you you can't do something, because immediately that's the only thing you start thinking about is that you can't do it, so that's the first step. Figure out what you want to write, come up with an idea. Don't let anybody tell you that it's been done before, because there is no idea that hasn't been done before. There are very few original ideas these days. So what your job is to do is to make it original to whatever it is you're telling. Sure, the Children of Lear has been redrafted. Cinderella has been redrafted a million times, right, in different ways. But what's your unique take on it? There can still be more people who want to read Cinderella in a different way, right? So nobody should tell you that. So that would be my 2 cents. And then make sure that you continue learning craft. So if you can't afford to take classes that people are offering, watch some of the master classes. Brandon Sanderson's, I was watching them all on YouTube because they are great. Those are really helpful. If you want fantasy, he's just a brilliant teacher. And so I think if you just practice, don't send anything out too early either. That's my last advice. One of the things all of us want to do is we want to get an agent, we want to get out there, we want to be represented, or we want to self-publish. Some people are, which is a great way to go too for some people. I just recommend making sure that you've had beta readers and people, really give you feedback. Because once you knock on a door, it's hard to go back through that door again, and it's a small publishing world. So just be ready, that's all.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
And then my last question is, what do you hope your readers take away from Kelcie Murphy and the Hunt for the Heart of Danu?
I think the most important thing in this story to me is remembering compassion, remembering the art of conversation and diplomacy. Remember that through conversation, there's a lot of instant anger these days. There's a lot of feeling explosive feelings. And one of the things that I think that younger adults, especially elementary and middle school kids, bring to the table is the ability to sit down and learn from each other without prejudice and judgment, that we haven't. And so with these kids leading the charge about trying to end this never-ending war, and get to the heart of what's happening, and to show that we have a lot more in common in the world than we have, apart from each other. That's what I'm hoping they take out of it, and have fun. I mean, and hopefully everybody sees themselves a little bit. I've tried my best to make it as diverse as I can, and because very fantasy oriented, but still, at its heart with everything, it's about two sides believing that they're right and neither one wanting to understand that they're wrong, and that not that they're wrong, but that it's time to find a way to come together. And that for me was an important message for the world, I guess, these days. So.
Yeah, I think that's a very fitting message for the world today. Especially, I mean, I'm in Canada, so I can kind of look at America as but there's of course a lot of divide, and I know children aren't necessarily blind to that. but I would say that that's also an important message for adults too, and for the people watching. Middle grade isn't just for middle grade.
No, I don't think so. I think everybody should read middle grade. I enjoy reading middle grade. And these kids too are coming at it from places of being fairly jaded too, having bad things happen to them, which continues even into book 3. You know, they're going to have to work this out. But I think that I hope it gives kids the empowerment to speak up, I guess, when they see an injustice, and to then be helpful with the resolution, because usually they have better ideas than we do. So
100%, yes. I used to be a program director in an after-school program.
yeah,
And kids are brilliant these days. I don't know where it
yeah,
comes from.
they are, yeah, they, and you know, they're I think much wiser than we were, and see things. You know, it's hard. You know, we're in a bit of a polarizing time, especially here in the States, and
Mhm.
I'm hoping things will calm down and people will come together a little bit more. That's my hope anyway. So
Fingers crossed.
fingers
But
crossed.
I think we're in good hands with the next generation.
I do too.
I think every generation gets bolder, and it's
Yeah,
beautiful to see.
yeah. If AI doesn't take over us,
That's true.
and my
They only
dog
have
just
to
gonna
on
punch
AI.
me hard on that. Oh my God, I'm gonna kill her. It's
That's
it's
opinions. It's
probably
great.
the office. Oh, sorry.
Love it. No, it's okay. It's okay. I have a dog too. I know so many of our members have pets. It's fine. This is just the joys of the world right now.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
Doing like all of the online interviews. So no worries. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us. This was
Yeah.
amazing. And thank you so much to everyone on the Nest that tuned in. Um,
Thank you.
know as well if you want to rewatch, it'll be on the Nest forever. Um, and our next author chat is happening on Sunday, August 13th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It'll be with Zoraida Cordova, who's the author of The Kiss of the Girl. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.